Hi, I'm Roger Anderton. I've sort of been investigating science and physics for a long time, trying to make out sense of things, and the history of it is kind of ends up getting very fascinating because it's so weird. And Einstein seems to be now being used as a massive diversion from the direction that physics was going in, from the Copernican revolution. So I managed to, really the direction of physics should have taken us more along the lines of what Tesla has been doing. Sort of, I've got pictures of Tesla, sort of in a magazine here. It's Tesla. And it's so in the country where Tesla came from, which is sort of the Serbia, Croatia area, he's sort of famous. And there's also another famous scientist from that area, and his name's Roger Boskovich. So I got this, Roger Boskovich wrote this book called The Theory of Natural Philosophy, and really modern physics should be paying more attention to what Roger Boskovich is talking about, and it's sort of like a continuation of physics after Newton. You've had, after Galileo and Kepler and so forth, you had Newton. Newton wrote his book, and then the Catholic Church had to reconsider what they'd done to Galileo. And so the top man who was in charge of looking at the science was this person called Roger Boskovich. He was a Catholic priest but also a scientist. And so with Einstein, it's sort of like Einstein came along, and then it was sort of like a massive diversion onto what Einstein was talking about, and really it should be a continuation from Newton to Boskovich and to other people like that. So that's what I managed to dig out from history. And so I've sort of done a website where I've put down this alternative sort of version of history, one which is emphasising the importance of Boskovich and other people who have worked on similar ideas, because Einstein is sort of like diverted attention. So I don't really know what direction to go in next, but with the sort of history, if you're picking it up from Einstein, Einstein wrote his papers on relativity and on what became quantum physics and atomic physics, and mainly this was in 1905, and he never cited any references from what he was working from. And so the way the mainstream then treats that is, it's a new starting point for physics, and then they concentrate on that and they kind of like divert attention from what was earlier with people like Boskovich. But with Einstein, he then said famously, God does not play dice with the universe. And what he was trying to say was he was disagreeing with the direction that quantum mechanics was going in. And after having disagreed with the direction quantum mechanics is going in by people like Niels Bohr and Heisenberg, they decided to ignore him. He then got sidelined from mainstream physics. Mainstream physics suddenly sidelined Einstein, and his kind of research was then forgotten about to a large extent. But you still have people that were working along the lines of what Einstein was talking about as research into unified field theory. And so one of the people is sort of David Bohm, and he was sort of he died in 1992. He was born in 1917, and he was sort of interested in researching unified field theory. So he was kind of carrying on what Einstein was doing. What's the next? But the problem he had was the Americans didn't treat him, they treated him as an American. They viewed him as a communist. So with all this kind of like problem they had with McCarthy, witch hunt and all that sort of thing, they had David Bohm, and he was not liked from the American authorities because they viewed him as a communist, so he got sidelined as well. So you basically had this tradition of people working on unified field theory, and it's outside the mainstream and it's got sidelined. It's sort of like an alternative version of history. And of course, when I trace back the history of it, it does go all the way back to, again, Roger Boskovich. It's sort of unified field theory tradition seems to start with him and carries on. And so after, only more fairly recently, I found out that David Bohm was sort of mentor to this person, who's Pierre Viaget. I don't know if I can say that correctly, but this person then gets conferences in his honour for physics people, but this is outside of the mainstream physics again. So you've got people outside the mainstream physics working on the unified field theory tradition, and it's not getting any sort of attention so much in the mainstream. And sort of like one of the big men that comes out from this sort of tradition who's still alive at the moment is this person here, who's a Myron Evans, who's a hot-headed, I think, Welshman. So I've got all this sort of like tradition of people who've worked on what is, I think, related to Tesla and this unified field theory. And you get people like this, who's with Baranski, who was working on a death ray, which sounds very similar to what Tesla was talking about, one of Tesla's things. But these people, a lot of these people just get ignored by the mainstream physics community. So that's basically what I found out, and I traced the history all the way back to what's going on. There's people who seem to be in authority, and they seem to kind of like to rewrite history all the time. So there's this version of history of a physics tradition on unified field theory, and the mainstream, well, they decide they don't want to pay any attention to that, and it's kind of cast out and discarded. And so what gets taught to physics students isn't this tradition anymore. And so the further you look into this tradition, the more murky it gets. And of course you get this idea that the people at the top, the ones with the real big money and who control everything, decide what kind of things they want to tell ordinary people. So what I understand is that the mainstream Freemasons only recognise a certain level, and I think it's 33rd, right. And that is what they consider Freemasonry. But if you're a person who gets to that, then you can get invited to what are lodges, which are not really officially recognised by mainstream Freemasonry, and so you can carry on getting higher degrees. And these are sort of like esoteric lodges. Yeah. And what I gather is that they do something like, they invite you to do the ritual, and it would be something like curse and swear at the Bible and take God's name in vain and all that sort of thing. And they say to you, do that. And if you refuse to do that, they'll say to you, you have passed the test. This was the test, you've passed the test. Oh. But you don't actually then get initiated higher up in the hierarchy. So you've got the you're supposed to have what are Satanists at the higher levels.
Don't they worship a god named Jabuwa?
I think it goes by different names, yeah. Some people say it's not Satanism, it's Luciferianism. And then it gets very confusing as to what the feedback you get, but seems to be the main man is this Aleister Crowley.
Yep.
And he's sort of like, according to when you investigate his sort of life, he got initiated higher up in the Freemasonry into these esoteric lodges. And so if you're taking it from that, it seems to be the black magicians, people who do evil magic and all that sort of thing, and it sort of like gets really unpleasant. Yeah. And so that's what seems to be behind it. And then you've got films like this one, Eyes Wide Shut. Yeah. If that's to be believed, it's by Stanley Kubrick. Then
he died in the middle of that.
Yeah, exactly. But it's sort of like if you believe that sort of thing, what they seem to have is these massive sex parties, orgies, and they're doing satanic rituals when they're doing that. Yeah. And it's sort of like, oh, that's unpleasant. Yeah. And you can trace it back to history further, places like the Hellfire Club. Yeah. And that seems to be a kind of satanist. And it's supposed to be people like Benjamin Franklin used to go to these things. Yeah. And once again, it's sex orgies with all that.
I've actually been there.
You've been to the...
I've been there. I went
to
to
the
the
caves.
bottom of the cave.
Yeah.
And went to the, around the grounds of the church on top that has
Yeah.
the golden ball on it.
Yeah. So it seems to be that it was Aleister Crowley. He was coming from that sort of tradition from the Hellfire Clubs. And you can kind of like say them like, they're sort of like people like rakes. They go by different, you call them rakes or you call them libertarians, but they're throwing away moral standards, is what we consider moral standards. Yeah. And so it's all very deeply unpleasant. And this seems to be what's at the higher levels of control in the country. And it's sort of like, you heard of somebody like Jimmy Savile?
Yeah.
And sort of like he's a paedophile, and you think to yourself, how could he get away with it so long? And he must have had connections.
Well, I think he was, especially the BBC, where they protected him.
Yeah.
For decades. On one trip I went to Jersey, we saw that children's home.
Yeah.
They had his little dead bodies buried.
Yeah.
Around it. It's very, very distant.
And it's sort of like it just breaks your mental processing as an ordinary person to think that sort of thing is going on higher up. Yeah. Well, they seem to be the ones in charge. And so there's this famous book about the Illuminati, because this is one of the names that they go by, the Illuminati. And it's this person who is Jonathan Robeson, who's in 1798, and he was complaining that the Illuminati were taking over the Freemasons. Right. They were just infiltrating the Freemasons at that time, according to him. And so you get in a lot of the information about what's coming through from that. And you also, but the official sort of like version of the Illuminati is supposed to come from this person, Adam Weishaupt.
Adam Weishaupt, yeah.
He was supposed to have founded the Bavarian Illuminati. But you seem to have lots of different groups that have gone by this sort of idea of being the enlightened ones throughout history. And whether they're all connected is a very difficult thing to ask. So I came from it from looking at it from this person. It's Roger Boskovich, and he was a priest in the Catholic Church, but also interested in science. And he was in this what you call Jesuits. Really, it's the Society of Jesus. It's a kind of like almost a secret society within the Catholic Church, and so there's a lot of bad things said about them through history, and it's really not a very good thing to go into, but they get accused of having committed conspiracies about trying to dispose heads of government and monarchs, because they're trying to promote a Catholic country all the time. If you've got people say like Queen Elizabeth I, she was a Protestant and she was refusing to marry a Catholic prince, so the Jesuits were then looking at the issue of trying to make England, the head of England, being a Catholic. And so they sort of like, she was always looking for conspiracies against her from Catholic people, and it's sort of like coming from the Catholic priests. So it's all these dirty little things that are associated going on in history, or all these conspiracies going on. Sort of the Jesuit order is supposed to be formed by this priest, who's what's his name? It's Saint Ignatius, and really you're looking at that, and it's saying, well, really when they first formed, they were before him, sort of thing. They were a group of people who considered themselves the enlightened ones, and so you could say they were the Illuminati as well. And so they then took the name Society of Jesus, and so it's sort of like, oh, is this what they're really coming from? And so you got this person like Adam Weishaupt, who says they forming the Bavarian Illuminati, and he's coming from a Jesuit background as well. And so you're looking at all these sort of things in history, and it's getting very unpleasant to talk about. So, as I was saying, it is a difficult thing to talk about all these sort of conspiracies that have been going on in history, because it's sort of like that you then can get accused of promoting hatred, and you don't really want to do that, but you're pointing out that there are groups that have their own agenda and they want to do something, and at the time you had the Jesuits, and they had their agenda and they wanted to promote the Catholic faith. So the things that they got up to was sort of like a fanaticism. They were prepared to do certain things which leads into conspiracies. And it's not just groups like them, it's other groups as well, all sort of like fighting it out with their own agendas. But when you look into the Christian religion, you then find out from him that paganism also got incorporated into Christian religion. You've got things like Jesus, the story about Jesus dying and coming back to life, being born of a virgin, and all this sort of thing. It seems to be pagan elements that have gone into Christianity as well, and so it seems to be a representation of the pagan sun god religion. And so you kind of like, on one level, Christianity is being promoted as meaning one thing, but then you've got people who are looking at it and maybe saying, we're looking at it as something different at a deeper level. And so you're wondering, all these priests and that, are they believing the same sort of Christianity as what the normal laity are believing? Because they've studied it in more detail. And so you get lots of these scary stories coming back about what they're believing. And I should have brought more slides on that, but the you get priests like Father Markley, who's come out, and I haven't got a slide on him, but he's come out. I think he's died since, but he came out from the Catholic places and was saying that many of the priests were converting to Satanism, which I take to mean that these priests, after learning their stuff from the Bible, are starting to take a belief in the pagan sun god religion. And so that is then again interpreted as Satanism. So it's a different level of Christianity to what normal people were looking at as Christianity. So you've got a kind of normal Christianity and a more deeper hidden meaning to Christianity, a sort of an esoteric version of it. So you've got all these horrible things going on as to what's going on at the deeper levels. What we got with Einstein is he seems to be set up as a diversion from what physics was before him. They've taken it up from him, and the person that seems to have started that is General Groves. General Groves is in charge of the Manhattan Project, which was the building the atomic bomb, the American atomic bomb. And so you think, well, yeah, he was in charge of that. He had all these scientists who were in charge of, and he had to get them to organise to work out how to build the atomic bomb. And the way General Groves decided to do it was to compartmentalise information. So if you were a scientist, you were working on a specific problem, you weren't knowing the context of that within the bigger context of the atom bomb. Yeah, so you would concentrate on one specific problem, other person was concentrating on another problem and so forth, but you weren't seeing the full picture, you were just compartmentalised onto certain things. And the idea of that was that it was less chance of the information leaking out as to the full information on how to build an atomic bomb. If you were going to leak, you were only leaking on a small bit of information that you knew about. So that was the idea of that. He had the idea because physics before this was a pretty much open domain to people. You could write articles and there was no sort of censorship on what you were writing about. But suddenly physics was having military significance. It had military importance, and so suddenly you were wanting to censor certain physics things. And so what he did was he went through all the physics journals that had been published, where he got his people to do it for him, went through it, and they were taking out things that were considered military sensitive, which had implications for secrets with the atom bomb. And so he went through all that. Physics was being censored. Existing physics articles that had been published were censored, and also, having done that, they were then censoring any new articles that had been published. And so I think as part of that censorship, he would have liked to censor this person, so Roger Boskovich. He would have liked to censor that, but he couldn't because it was too deeply ingrained into history. And the history was atomic physics is really coming from this person. Modern atomic physics comes from this person. Because if you trace the idea back to the ancient Greeks, they had this idea that matter was built out of atoms. But what type of atom? And the type of atom that finally came about was from this person, which was as a point particle. So modern atomic physics is based upon this idea of point particles, and that was sort of initiated by Roger Boskovich, that tradition of physics. So General Groves would want to cut that out, but he couldn't because it was too deeply ingrained into history. So you just then got people to ignore it. So when it comes down to the rewriting of history, they just ignore mentioning him, Roger Boskovich, to physicists, physics students. They just ignore it. They don't get taught that modern atomic physics is based upon this idea of point particles coming from Roger Boskovich. It's just ignored. So when you can't cut something out of the history, when you can't censor history, when there's something too big, you just ignore it. And so this version of history which they're teaching physics students is sort of coming from setting up Einstein as the big man of setting up quantum physics and relativity, and they're trying to ignore the physics that was happening before him from people like Boskovich. So with taking it from Einstein, the official point of view is Einstein is right about relativity but wrong about quantum physics. And so when it comes to the issue of unified field theory that Einstein was investigating, they've diverted people from looking at that issue. And so, contrary to the mainstream, I'm going with the idea that Einstein had a lot wrong with relativity theory, but he was right about quantum physics. Quantum physics, the direction they were going in was wrong. And you then have people, as I say, from this group, this alternative physics people, and they're still having competencies on this. They're still investigating physics along this idea of Einstein's unified field theory, which I trace back once again to this person, Roger Boskovich. It was still based upon this idea of an extension to Newton, to this idea of a unified theory based on point particles. And the main book on that from Boskovich is this one. So really more attention should be paid to that. Okay, this is a book on Boskovich, and I've translated it from Dragoslav Stogovich, who's a retired chemist in Serbia, because Boskovich is coming from sort of area of the world, the same area as Tesla, and so far the mainstream in the West have managed to ignore this sort of thing. What the people over in Serbia, Croatia and that sort of area of the world, they sort of like ignore what they know. And when I went over to Serbia, I was wondering, why don't the people in Serbia know about, the physics community do know about Boskovich a bit more detail than the people in America and in England. But I thought, why don't they know about it in more detail? And what I found out was that the people, because it used to be behind the Iron Curtain, these people, they are learning physics from America. They're going by American physics textbooks. And so because the American physics textbooks are ignoring people like Boskovich and Tesla and so forth, what the standard education to a physics student in these countries is pretty much along the same lines as America and England, that they're ignoring it as well. Because I would have thought, well, you go to their country and they would have been taught a different version of physics, promoting their national heroes, but they don't. They're going by what America is telling them. And I think the reason they're going by America is America became a superpower and demonstrated that it was able to make an atomic bomb. So when it comes to physics, you say, well, America's proven itself, we need to know what America knows. So it became more a question of following what America was saying about physics rather than paying attention to any of their national physics heroes and physics and other science heroes. So if you're taking it from Einstein, there was a lot of people disagreeing what Einstein was saying when Einstein became famous in 1919, and with the so-say observation, but there was lots of people who were complaining that they weren't agreeing with what Einstein was saying. And two of the most prominent ones were Nobel Prize winners in physics, and they were disagreeing with Einstein. So what were their names? It was sort of I forgot their names at the moment, but they were saying they were disagreeing with Einstein. And unfortunately, it then gets involved in the Hitler Nazi movement. Suddenly, if you're going to be anti-Einstein's physics, you're kind of like getting criticised then of being anti-Semitic. that you've been accused of racism. And so this whole line of physics on that side of things got mirrored in being accused of racism. So people who were saying that they didn't believe in Einstein's relativity were being accused of being anti-Semitic. And so it's another way that they use to block things. You can't, it's all sort of like a brainwashing, a mental conditioning. Sort of like you read Einstein's relativity and think, well, this doesn't really make any sense. But then if you say it doesn't make sense, rather than address those issues that it doesn't make sense, the people who want to believe it then start accusing you of some sort of hate crime. And so you're kind of blocking the discussion of the physics just purely on the physics. You're diverting attention onto the emotional side of things. It's quite horrible and terrible. That's one thing that happened. But you've still got people who are saying that Einstein is wrong. And one of the films is this one by called Einstein Wrong, The Miracle Year. And you've still got people who are looking at the physics of Einstein and not agreeing with it. And this person made this documentary film, and when he tried to get it shown at the film festivals, he found himself blocked. And I reckon the reason he gets blocked is because these people, Einstein's got this massive fan club of people, and they don't want people to say Einstein is wrong, so they just block you. So you've got this massive fan base who are just going to block you anyway. And it's all based on emotions. You can't really address the physics because you've got people emotionally committed to thinking Einstein is a genius. But then, as I say, in the higher levels of mainstream physics, they decided to ignore Einstein on quantum physics, but agree with him on relativity theory. So it's kind of a dogma. Einstein's right about relativity, but wrong about quantum physics, and that's the dogma. And to be able to switch it around the other way and say Einstein has got a lot wrong with relativity, and to say that Einstein was probably right about quantum physics, which is the alternative, it's very difficult to then get that sort of voice heard. It's something which is sidelined from the mainstream point of view. It's an alternative view which is not going to be accepted. The mainstream just wants to promote their dogma as one point of view, and then they block everything, such as films like that. They block it because they're promoting their dogma. For their point of view, they want science to have only one point of view. It's not like politics where you've got two different political parties. They just want to promote one point of view. It's a dictatorship. When there's an alternative to what they're saying, they don't want to allow that, and they block it. When I pick up physics and how it's supposed to be picked up from, where the next step on from Newton was this person, Boskovich, who lived in the 18th century. The main book he wrote was this one, Theory of Natural Philosophy. So you're picking up physics theory from this person. What you find with what was the Copernican revolution, which you had Copernicus, you had Galileo, you had Kepler, and then people like Newton. Next step on would have been Boskovich, and Boskovich was a Catholic priest, and what he was doing was reconsidering what they'd done to Galileo, because the Catholic the Pope and the Inquisition and all that had persecuted Galileo, as is known, and they put him under house arrest, and they were disapproving of what Galileo was saying. And so you had the issue of, after Galileo, Newton coming along in England and having similar things to to what Galileo was talking about, and so you had to have the Catholic Church had to reconsider what they did to Galileo. They had to consider whether they were going to go with Newton's physics, and the person that managed to get Newton's physics accepted by the Catholic Church, the main man seems to have been this person, Roger Boskovich. He was sort of their expert, and so the Catholic Church, despite blocking Galileo, had then started to accept Newtonian physics as something to be taught in Catholic countries. It's sort of like a revision to things. And if you look at the history further back, the existing physics before the Copernican revolution was this idea of the Earth being the centre of the universe. And from a religious point of view, that was Earth at the centre, the heavens above, and God looking down from the heavens. And that was looking at it from a religious point of view. And so when you were talking about, oh no, it's not that way around, that the Earth and the Sun are moving in a sort of way that Copernicus talked about, really about a common centre of gravity. When you've got that going on, where the Earth is not absolutely stationary, it's relative motion between the Sun and the Earth, and it's not that picture of God above with the heavens. You've got then a crisis, because even though we think this is wrong nowadays, the people who believed this had a worldview which made sense to them. The world made sense to them by thinking about it like this. They were here on Earth, and above them was God and the heavens. And when people were sort of reporting that angels were coming down from heaven, that made sense to them from this point of view. But you suddenly think, well, the Earth is a planet like other planets, and the other planets are up here, then what we're calling angels might be creatures, aliens, like, or entities like ourselves, but living on the planets. You suddenly have this crisis where what we're calling angels might be aliens, and we're not unique in the universe. With this model, we are unique. We are here on Earth. We are the human beings. We're the centre of God's attention, and these things out here are angels. But suddenly, they're not angels under the revision. Suddenly, they could be aliens, and we're just one of many aliens out there. Species, and it's a crisis. It's what I call an existential crisis, and I think it is still the crisis we're suffering from at the moment in science. They don't want to accept information about UFOs. When people sort of like claim to have encounters of aliens, they want to dismiss that. They don't want to accept that. And when it comes to the actual science, which came from the Copernican revolution, where it's suddenly a revision where the Earth is not the centre of the universe, they don't want to accept the natural progression from Copernicus revolution that there are aliens out there. So when it comes to eyewitnesses' account of things like aliens, or eyewitness account in the medieval times of angels coming down from heaven, no, we can ignore that as superstition. And when it comes now to, well, maybe they should be interpreted as aliens, we can dismiss that as well. We don't. It's sort of like it's a kind of dogma of the science that they've fostered upon us. A lot of the physics was diverted from what people like Tesla were doing, and Tesla was saying lots of strange things, which we now talk about in terms of things like free energy and death rays and things like that. But he also was thinking he had what were signals from aliens, radio signals. And so I've pointed out that in one of the things I got published in a UFO online thing, that what SETI are doing are ignoring certain signals which are really alien intelligence signals. And they sort of like, that's another way things are getting blocked. If you're with Tesla's physics, you've got things like what they call longitudinal waves and scalar waves and so forth, and it's something which the mainstream have a block on as understanding. And so when they're getting people who are getting this sort of thing on their radio, telescopes and things, they're ignoring it. It's being blocked. So I pointed this out. It's sort of like block this way of understanding physics, and it's sort of, he censored the physics, what is taught. So he censored the physics which was being taught, General Groves, and so now they've censored that physics, they're refusing to consider things which should be interpreted as aliens and dismissing it. Sort of more information is on my website about that sort of thing. And so it's just this question of easily blocking the UFO things as by dismissing the science upon which it is based. You just put a block on that science, you don't accept it, you just put a block on it. And so when the scientists, mainstream scientists say, I have to prove, well, they've already blocked considering that sort of avenue of research.